Hi guys, welcome back to Verdant. I'm Ellibear, and going on with our Mental Health Awareness Month theme, I am joined by two of probably my favourite people in the industry. I'm joined by Nymaera and I'm
Oh,
joined by Initialize. So you would have seen these guys NLC, you would have seen them casting some of our games, you would have seen, Alex over in the LEC, and today we're going to be talking about the mental health that kind of surrounds casting and on-air talent that obviously is something that doesn't really get spoken about outside of the occasional kind of Twitter comment of I'm not going to be doing this event because of my mental health. So I guess my first question, kind of to open this, I mean either one of you can take this because it's relevant to both of you, is the mental strain that casting can have on you obviously is quite a large topic. Is it the audience perception that kind of gets you guys the most? Is it the preparation? Where is it that the kind of the stress and the issues tend to lie mostly?
oh Lord. Um, I suspect we'll have different answers for this because it's
Yeah,
obviously
you go
that's the
first, and
kind of
Sam.
thing which
I'll
is very
collect my thoughts.
individual. Yeah. So I think for me, it's I think a lot of it comes from my end in the sense that this is a performance art, right? You are there to go on stage and perform in some way or in some way, shape, or form. I shouldn't have used that word twice, but the point stands. In that you are on stage, you are there to provide a product, you're there to be an entertainer, a commentator, all of those things, and give across a great product. And at the end of the day, you have to come off that stage and be content with the product you put out. And not just that, you need to see whether everybody else actually enjoyed what you put out. And everything in the end largely comes down to how that comes across. And so a lot of the stress comes down to making sure that you get to come off that stage and feel like you put yourself across in the best light possible, or at least in a good light. Not every show can be perfect. Um, and that is quite hard work to do because any one of any number of things can mean that that doesn't happen. That can be your preparation wasn't quite right, or you misremembered something, or you just having an off day and aren't quite hitting the lines you want, or the person you're casting with you don't connect with the way you want, or the audience for whatever reason just doesn't like you, which of course can occasionally happen because people's opinions are opinions, and not everyone has to like everything you do, and all of this stuff adds up to basically everything pinpoint focuses on one specific little part of your life. There's 20 minutes to a few hours of you being on stage and trying to put across a perfect performance, inverted commas, such as there is such a thing. And that is quite difficult. So the stress is effectively, it's in kind of, at least for me, that perfectionism in it. And I've always been a bit of a perfectionist to begin with. And this brings out the best and worst of that. And in some ways, I don't mind a certain amount of pressure. I kind of need a little bit of it to put out the best work, but it can be quite wearing, especially when things like job security and money and moving and flat hunting and everything else just piled in on top of it. Um, and when you value putting on a good show, a good product, a good performance, um, it can be quite difficult to step away and take value in other things as well, and view things objectively. Like you can like get very it's very easy to get hung up on small mistakes and not take it for what it actually is as a whole. And that's probably a little bit meandering, but I hope that gives some idea. I wonder whether Alex with his more collected thoughts might offer a different side there.
So, um, so yes, I agree. There's a lot of stuff which is kind of relates to the on-stage anxiety of things, I suppose. And just to be like, I guess, completely clear from my perspective, obviously my perspective won't be the same as someone else's because people are very individual when it comes to the way that stress affects them and the way that kind of manifests. For clarity, I have suffered from anxiety for a number of years now anyway. So for me, I have to kind of like kind of separate a couple of things too to just say, is this just me, regular brain, not being too good today, or is this kind of a product of the position that I'm in, and is that reasonable or not? I think that there's a lot of stuff about being on stage. I think Sam's right. I think that when you are exposed to increasingly larger stages, you're also exposed to increasingly large, unkind vocal minorities. And it doesn't have to be that many people, but someone starts putting in a couple of comments in every YouTube, Reddit, or Twitter thread about you, and actually that's actually so much affects a lot of casters. Now, luckily, I've not experienced that. Actually, I've had a very kind response to my work on NLC and the LEC in this split. But it is something that you are worried about every time you're on stage, I think, because at least I am to a certain extent, in terms of you slip up once and people can use that as ammunition against you, even though, the overwhelming body of your work can be very good. It's the whole perfectionism thing. The bit which isn't perfect gets focused on quite heavily. I think I'm largely in line with what Sam was saying, though. So I'd rather kind of go into a different kind of subset of stress in the industry, which I think is just a lot of our industry stuff for me. Because the majority of casters you're going to see are going to be the majority of people that you see on screen are going to be either freelance or even if they are in a full-time position, it will be a very competitive position for their role. And that is just the nature of the industry. This isn't necessarily a fault of anyone involved. It's just a case of you don't feel like your job is safe in the overwhelming majority of circumstances when you're in this industry. And you're competing with a lot of very talented, very skilled folks for the roles which you want. And there are only so many slots. I think that this is apparent at all levels of casting. I think this isn't just apparent at the top. I don't think it's just apparent in your grassroots scenes as well when you're trying to make that break towards the pro, as Sam and I've done in the last split to a year. And I'm very happy to call a lot of the people which I work with close friends now, and having that kind of, it's meant to be a healthy competition, but at the end of the day, there are sometimes breaking points where someone really needs those gigs and they're not going to get them because of that competition. So that's another stress, because you're being played off effectively just by the nature of the industry against that, and that's sadly a natural part of this industry right now. Does it have to be that way? I don't know. I haven't got all my thoughts together on that front, nor am I a TO, so I don't exactly have a hand in that matter as well. But that's another sense of stress to it. So there's a lot of the on-screen stuff. There's a lot of industry stuff. I think for us, particularly, we moved countries for this. We moved from the UK. We moved to London to Berlin, and that was as freelancers. So we're basically doing that off our own backs, which cost an awful lot of money. It was an awful lot of stress. It was while we were doing a lot of our work as well, and that was, again, adding up on top of it. And so there's a lot of kind of adapting to a new place. It's a lot of adulting in a new way. For myself particularly, I'm not kind of used to this shit as much. And I suppose the last part on top of that then is that, because this is kind of the kind of the flow of this has been all these individual areas, but actually they kind of twin together. Actually, they add on to each other. And it keeps adding on with the more stuff you end up doing. And for myself, because I was very aware that I only had one chance to make a first impression, this split has gone very well for me. But I'm of the opinion that it's gone well for me because I've worked very fucking hard for it. I ended up doing NLC. I ended up doing LEC. Sam and I were still doing our LGL startup fan broadcast. So I was effectively, every day of the week, I was up at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, maybe even earlier than that. And that's not the lifestyle which I was in before this point, because I was a student. And while I did have some early starts, it was a very different change of pace for me. So that was quite difficult for me personally. I was effectively working 7 days a week to some extent, between having meetings for the shows that I would be on, the actual show days which I was on, and then also the fan broadcast, and then also doing the live stuff, and then also looking for flats, and then also doing visa stuff. And because you're so aware that you need to hit the ground running, and I think momentum is a huge part in esports and being on our talent, because you want to keep yourself relevant, you want to keep yourself on the radar. That all adds into each other as well. So for me, I think those are the three big overarching things. I think there's the on-screen stuff, which for me, ironically, I think is the least stressful part. The off-screen stuff in terms of industry, and then there's the kind of scheduling and other life stuff all just building up. Those are the 3 points which I think have been defining my split of stress so far.
That seems pretty fair. So I guess I've got one question for you then, Sam, to kind of watch your brother go through literally 7-day weeks for the industry. I can imagine probably your workload wasn't as heavy as his because he had the LEC on top of it. How was that for you, like having to kind of watch that happen? Like obviously you two have always been really close and you went out there together, and obviously you're there as like both as a support network for each other. But how how did that affect you in terms of having to watch somebody else go through that, somebody that is obviously so close to you?
Yeah, it's kind of, it's a full disclosure. Me and Al live together in the same flat, so I see him like every day on that front. So I got a fairly
My
good idea of what was
condolences.
going on. Yeah, I know it's a challenge. At least we're both decent cooks. That definitely helps. Food goes a long way to soothing irritated brothers. It turns out. But yeah, it's a bit odd because as Al said, he obviously I've known him for a very long time at this point, obviously for obvious reasons. But I know and have seen him suffer with things like anxiety. And the thing with this industry, as we've been kind of saying, is like there's a lot of things that combine together, but the bit that people see is the bit that's on screen. And so when effectively you are working 7 days a week, a lot of those days are trying to just turn up and then never turn off, right? You don't get to have those moments where you're just AFK at a keyboard, really, because you've got to be prepping, or then you've got to be, on stage, you've got to be doing all this stuff. And then so Al is basically up super early, prepping, going through all these VODs, doing loads of notes, talking with loads of people, going into call times, meetings, then getting to the show, getting prep, makeup, and you have
Actually
to be there
watching
hours
games.
beforehand, hours watching the games. Then you've got to cast the games, and that's obviously quite high energy. You're on camera all the time. There's no real time to break. Then you finally get done, and by the time you're home, it's 2 a.m. And so you've basically done 8 through 2, something like that on
Yeah,
certain days.
and
Yeah.
so kind of pulling off. There's one of the so there was kind of like I was asked a couple of questions when I was on a couple of podcasts. Actually, when I was on Summoning Insight the one time, Thorin got me pretty good actually, and he was like, "Hang on, why are you being so down on yourself about your casting? What's up with that? You should really be taking more pride in yourself." I think one thing which adds in the context to that for me is that effectively every show day this split after a week or two, I was having a migraine a day. I used to have migraines about once every 1 to 2 months. It's something which I've suffered since I was about 14. And a lot of the time that comes from not eating well, not sleeping well, being stressed, all of the rest of the not looking after myself particularly well kind of factors, right? And though I think actually being on show day gave me a good schedule and a good structure of my life to actually, actually have a decent sleeping pattern, actually eat well. Yeah, it's a packed schedule, but it's a schedule which I can kind of at least kind of bend myself to and kind of like live an adult life. But due to the amount of stress and the amount of work I was doing, kind of like the 0 to 100 nature of it, where like I said, my lifestyle wasn't really that before I started this split, and now it definitely is. I was getting to the point where I was having a migraine every day, so I've been kind of surviving off of painkillers by the packet, which is one of the reasons I was sat there thinking, look, this is affecting the way that I prep. This is affecting the way that I work. That all feeds back into, actually, I don't think I'm doing as good a job as I could do. Now, I'm still proud of what I did. I actually think I did a great job this split.
You did.
But I'm also sat there thinking, man, I wish I wasn't having to deal with this at the same time. An extra, I'm sure that everyone else has their kind of like these extra factors. They're just like, look, if this thing was just out the way, I'd be doing a better job, because various things kind of hold you back in XYZ form. But this one was pretty big for me in terms of it was affecting a lot of the stuff which I was doing, in terms of the way that I prepped, the way that I was appearing on camera, the way I was sleeping, all the rest of it, right? And that was kind of like a symptom of what was happening, which then kind of like made it quite recursive and made it worse as things went on. So I'm hoping that in summer, I can kind of get a better handle on that, but because that wasn't great, and that's one of the reasons which I was a little bit more down on myself than maybe I should have been. Because I can't remember if I talked about this before, but yeah. Anyway, that was a big factor for me, this split, in terms of how that stress kind of manifested and how that kind of ended up in turn affecting my work, which then, of course, made me more stressed. So yeah.
What a wonderful recursive cycle.
Yeah.
So yeah, to kind of finish up that point that you were asking about how it was like looking in from the outside, it's a bit odd because obviously I love my brother dearly and he's out there as my best friend. I love this guy to pieces as much as he irritates
You're
me.
right.
Yeah, see, that's what I mean. He's passable, which is about as good as people get in my life. Where is this hate coming from? Anyway, there is it's quite weird, obviously, in the fact that I can see exactly how hard and how much Al loves all of this. You know, like in terms of how hard he's working, how much he loves this, and that's great. But there is no time off, none at all. Not during the split. When it is when the season is going, there is no break. And especially when you are trying to do, you know, not just one league but three, and then podcasting because it's your first impression. You're trying to do all the rest of it. You know, like make a good, you know, and so you're trying to hit the ground running and get going because as you said, there is competition for these spaces, right? Like there's a lot of other people who'd love to be doing what we're both doing, and you've got to keep your value high, I suppose. And so there is a permanent anxiety, basically that when you're not doing something, you feel like you should be doing something,
Yes.
and it is very
100% that.
difficult, very difficult to actually take a break and know that whatever offers or jobs or things you turn down in order to take that break, you will still have work to come back to afterwards.
And for the record, this is something which I've spoken with a lot of more experienced casters than and I think everyone's been through this as a freelancer at some point. I'm sure if there are more experienced casters who kind of listen back into this, some of them will go like, these young casters, they knew what they were getting into. I remember going through that. And yeah, it's kind of a rite of passage of any self-employed freelance creative to kind of understand their work-life balance and hopefully not burn out in the process. I think you kind of have to understand the limitations of it, sadly. But yeah, it's a rite of passage, kind of.
But you know and you know, and obviously like looking on that, I could see that was, you know, Al was pushing it pretty close to the wire, bluntly. Like our parents came out twice while we just moved, and I think Alex on both weeks had last minute scheduling calls to come and do stuff on both weeks. We didn't actually see him very much in both weeks, either of them, and that's the deal of it because everything in esports is also last minute. Because you're asked to fill in with a day's notice.
Well, I mean, the first time I got my gig on UKLC, it was Jamada's internet dying, so
yeah,
I was
exactly. So
I
we
was
were
I was
out the
foot
door.
out. We literally just opened the door to go out and have some food with our parents, and I was like, sorry guys, I'm gonna go get my big break, and we're gonna go cast UKLC, and that was a big thing. And the thing is that like I'm very happy to do that because I'm really happy that I get these opportunities. I'm very blessed to have these opportunities, but like there is a cost. There's always going to be a cost.
Yeah,
it's just whether you think that's worthwhile, and I think in those cases it was, but it's just worth keeping in mind.
Yeah, so like obviously that's kind of it's a weird mix of packed schedules, and then when your schedule isn't packed, you feel guilty about it, and then random opportunities come up and you pounce on them because you feel like you can't say no, at least when you're starting out, and that all adds up, and that's none of that is necessarily bad by itself, and it's got some real upsides. Like obviously it's our name's out there. Alex has done a fantastic job in terms of really proving himself as a fantastic commentator and analyst. Like that's great news. But it takes a lot out of you. You know, when that does lead to, you know, migraine today, lots of anxiety, stress, all the rest of it, I think you can see why a number of these more experienced casters who are a lot more ingrained in the system at this point and are a lot more stable in terms of the ability to say no to jobs, which is, in fairness, one of the powers of being a freelancer. So, you know, why are we not seeing Cadril and Captain Flowers particularly taking up the MSI stuff as well? You know, they've got their own. You know, obviously I won't speak for them what's going on, but you know, part of it, I'm sure, is the fact that they actually do have the potential to say no because there is a hell of a lot going on, and sometimes it can just be too much. However cool the gig is, and you know, when you're basically flat out January through January through October, effectively with a week off after MSI before split start again, and you know you're working weekends as well, and midweek stuff as well. Like, you don't really get anything resembling proper time off, and it's very difficult to actually structure in relaxation. And I'm aware, again, that's a little meandering, but that's probably because a lot of this stuff is intertwined.
Well, it's one of the reasons why I started streaming more, right? Because streaming is like that halfway house for me between kind of being productive and kind of relaxing, kind of. But yeah,
right.
you know, in my experience, you know, it's kind of hard to learn how to take a break again. And you know, again, I've talked with this a lot about a lot of people, and a lot of people give me a lot of advice on that. I haven't quite found my own balance for that yet, but yeah, as far as I'm aware, that one's quite a prevalent industry issue, of which there are many. I think there's actually a lot of stuff bubbling underneath the surface while not talent.
Great advice on it. Yeah, so I got some really good advice from our godmother, wonderful woman, who is or was a GP. But also does a fair amount of sort of like life coaching-y stuff from medical perspective, in the sense of like, okay, how do you actually go about effectively relaxing? one of the kind of things she does a lot of work in. One of those things was actually relaxing. Ironically, takes a fair amount of work. In the sense that actually just anxiously sitting there, it's quite possible, and very often that people just anxiously sit there for a day and don't relax because they feel guilty about relaxing, and so don't do anything. And so in the end of the day, you waste your day your relaxation day, not being anxious about relaxing and not relaxing at all, and you feel even more guilty and even more stressed because you didn't relax and you spent that time being guilty. It's like, well, I wasted that time anyway. And so you end up in this horrible cycle of not actually relaxing and failing to do anything with the time that you set aside. And it's actually okay and a good thing to take that time, once, twice a week, or if you can afford it, to properly take time off to, go play the guitar, go outside, go for a walk, go sit and play a video game, not for work, which is a rare thing for esports casters, players, whoever. And I really valued her advice and some of the stuff she was talking about on that. Because
and on that note, I've downloaded Genshin Impact. See you at Adventure level 50 or whatever it is.
See you there, my mate. See you there.
So, I guess this question is kind of going to tie into what you guys have just said. That difference between switching off from the esports world. I mean, I was talking to somebody about this the other day. I was talking to someone from G2, and I was saying that I don't feel like I switch off from esports. Like, when I stop working, I then go and watch games because I then need to learn more, or I will go and play games because I need to effectively learn more. What is that breakaway point for you guys? Like, the switching off.
Oh,
I know that it's difficult as well because you spend a lot of time with people as well in Berlin who are, in... Give me just a second. Oh my God, my microphone has not been picked up this entire conversation.
I would put you up. Oh, you're not on your recording though?
Nope.
Oh no!
Oh wait, no, yes it has.
Oh, okay, we're good.
I'm gonna leave that in. I'm gonna leave that in.
That's a great recording. Okay, you might see the subtitle yourself. That would be hilarious.
There's gonna have to be some weird video editing here.
No, it's fine. It was picking it up.
Anyway,
it was.
So the question. Yes. Switching off, spending time around people in the industry, kind of blah blah blah, lots of stuff like that. So there is a lot to do. Again, this conversation could literally go on for days. Based off of the, and I'm aware that we're kind of very much on the starting end of our profession. We haven't had the same kind of experiences that people have been around for 5, 6, even more years, right? So we're speaking from our perspective. So there's a lot of learning for us, which will probably be quite standard with people who come into this industry.
I look forward to watching this back in about 5 years and seeing how naive we were.
I'm fairly self-aware of the fact that I'm actually not aware of stuff, or I'm kind of I kind of understand it in theory, just haven't experienced it yet. I came into this industry. I thought I was naive. Nah, there is a level of naivety which I'd gotten rid of, and nope, there's a lot for me to still be jaded about apparently. But when it comes to actually kind of again, the whole kind of switching on work mode, turning off, trying to relax about stuff. I mean, I'm still very blessed to enjoy the game which I cast. I do enjoy playing League still. I enjoy watching League. I enjoy learning about League, so that makes things easier for me. I also, I particularly in terms of the good things, right? I think that actually, in terms of particularly the NLC lot and a lot of the people that flew in for E-Masters, like the LPL lot as well, they have been lovely to hang out with. And that has felt because, again, we've moved country for this, and I'm not necessarily the most outgoing person. I'm not 100% introverted, but I definitely do like my own space and my own time. Having those connections through, even though it is through work, and some people prefer to kind of keep their work and private lives very separate, and that's that's completely valid. But for me, having that relationship with the other casters and the other talent has been really cool in terms of a social life. After E-Masters, pretty much every day that people were in town, we were going out and grabbing food. We were going out and hanging out with each other. And I really appreciated that. That's a very cool thing. And I'm glad that at least this current generation of talent seems to have a decent balance of at least that social aspect. Now, I still don't have a lot of roots down in Berlin, so I often spend a lot of time online and just at my PC and whatever. And yeah, sometimes it can draw into this monotony of, I gotta go watch some more games. Oh, MSI is on, even though I'm not working it. I should really do some content around that. Ooh, let's go talk to other people about MSI so I can do X, Y, Z. And there are good things and there are bad things about that because at least, because we're not working right now because your master's finished. We've got a little while until NLC and LEC and what have you starts back up. It kind of helps tide things over. But it is a little. I don't do much that isn't League, I will admit, and that has had some negative impact. Sometimes I will wake up in the middle of the night thinking about something like, "Wow, why didn't I say this on cast?" Or, that was a weird Graves top pick in this game," and I'm like, why is my brain permanently League mode now?" And that's kind of the part of the overcharging your schedule to kind of get to this point, right? It just kind of infects every part of your life.
I think to go back to the, I think Al's done a really good conversation on that as well. But to come back to that question about how do you switch off, and the honest answer is you don't. I think I'll cover that a little bit as well because esports is a global thing. League of Legends is a global thing, and so when your social media and how you contact a lot of your friends is online, and that's inextricably linked with esports and your professional life. Your Twitter account isn't really personal anymore when you're in esports. It is a professional account that also happens to have your friends on it, and so everything you tweet, everything you do is attached to that. And as much as I love messing around with the people in my scene, like, look at the tweets we all have between us and Middlecott, for example. Again, shout out to him, wonderful person to interact with in general. Or whoever else, Asheen and his breakfast club that's great to be a part of. We never put that hashtag on.
What, the Berlin brunch?
The Berlin Breakfast Club, yeah. We can't
Berlin
acronym that one.
Yep.
Can't acronym that one.
No.
The British Broadcasting Company would get in trouble with us. That's why.
Yeah.
But like, all of that, all of that is wonderful, but it means that, like when something happens at 2 a.m. in the States and you get a ping for it, or for us, it's, the LJL, which is 9 hours ahead, or there's Korea, or there's Europe. And so everything's happening all the time, all that and your professional and personal lives are inextricably linked. It is de facto almost impossible, especially when all of your work and all of your friends and everything else is tied online. And yes, you can detox from being online, but you can't do that when it's the middle of the season and you're working, right? And so you have to do what Azael does occasionally, like head out to the mountains, leave your phone behind, and you get to do that like once a year, maybe, or I don't know, maybe around Christmas or something. Just but then obviously that has its own stresses, right? Because then you're moving back and there's like 30,000 members of your family around. It's not really, especially if you are constantly around people as part of work. Sometimes it's nice to be in a room with a book and not talk to people for a bit, and that's quite hard when things like your family who you love dearly but are all around all the time, and so the one quiet part of the house is the corner of the basement with the guitar, right? It's not quite the same. And so even those moments get quite hard to come by. And the other bit, like, to get a little theoretical on you, so here you go, I'll do this one for you. So disclosure, I'm one of my before I got into esports proper, I was something of a game and esports academic. So I did a lot of journalism. I did a master's hell in some of the theoretical stuff. And there's a really good quote from a guy called Roger Kalwa, I think is probably the one. It's probably the guy I would go to quote. So there's a really, really good book from 2001 called Man Play Games, and the quote in that goes something like that. And this is specifically talking about games, talking about esports, talking about what it means to be a player or a cast or whatever in the scene. It's like, what used to be pleasure becomes an obsession. What was an escape becomes an obligation. And what was a pastime is now a passion, compulsion, and of course, anxiety. The principle of players become corrupted. It's now necessary to take precautions against cheats and professional players, a unique product of the contagion of reality. In the sense that, to add some context, those very high-minded words, that you're not really just playing a game or taking part in a hobby or yelling at games because it's fun. It's work. It's reality. It's not an escape from reality. And at the same time, it's still part of what you do as a hobby. It's still part of what you do for fun. Play League of Legends, watch League of Legends, any other esport or game you happen to be involved with. And that line between what is play and what is work, what is off time and what is on time is blurred to non-existent. And there's any other number of academic works on this I could shout to. There's a really good book called The Work of Play, which is like from an American journal a few years ago by T.L. Taylor. It's similar. In fact, T.L. Taylor's books in general are fantastic on this one. Tom Brock did an essay on Roger Calwell, the guy I just quoted on as well. Did similar stuff. I've written essays on some of this stuff. Even if I do less of the academic stuff, a lot of those quotes and a lot of those books stick with me because they often phrase things, yes, a little bit more extravagantly, but also a lot more accurately than sometimes I ever could. And that quote in particular from Carwell really does stick with me, and I think is very true about the nature of esports as a bizarre hybrid between reality and
yeah, but
reality
like
play
one last
and all
aside
that.
on that. Yeah, but one last thing about that is that just to kind of sum that up is that the follow on from that is that if it does get to the point where it's not just it's work, but it's like grueling work and you're not actually enjoying it, I think as on-air talent that really makes you suffer as well, because you need to bring that passion, you need to bring that enjoyment. I think if you're a caster and you're not enjoying what you're casting, and sometimes you can kind of like amp that up a little bit, right? But if you're genuinely not enjoying what you cast because of these things, it affects your product
Yes,
too, which then
absolutely.
is a huge source of stress because you don't think you're very good at your job. So all kind of wraps back into these original kind of overarching anxiety points.
Yeah, 100%. So I guess, is there a difference between the stress levels between kind of just analyst desking and casting, or is it all kind of on the same kind
Depends
of
on the
level?
person. Depends on the person.
Yeah.
So, coming from in my position, and again, this will be different from people who've had a lot more experience at XYZ roles, because some people are more naturally cut out for casting or analyst desk just because of the way that they present their product. I'm always going to prefer casting over analyst desk. I love being in game. I love being able to kind of like call things as they happen. But coming from a remote broadcasting background, because everyone has, right, when they start out, unless you're doing local tournaments, and that's not really been a thing during COVID. We started as lockdown started, so we didn't really have that ability to do that. You don't have the same ability to build a show like an analyst desk does. So for people that don't quite understand the workflow, because it's kind of, I'm not saying it's shrouded in secrecy, but it's not something that's overly talked about, right? If you are on analyst desk for a day or a weekend, you have a meeting earlier in the week to decide the initial like pre-show and a couple of segments which you'll want to do during the show. You need to be pitching ideas. You need to be thinking about XYZ, about portraying players, teams, picks, overall meta, and kind of build 3 to 5 minute segments on various things. At least that's the way that the LEC does it, and the NLC does that for the pre-show as well. So there's some industry standards around that, I suppose, in terms of what's worked out best for League of Legends broadcasts. And then on the day, you'll be obviously before that, actually, again, if you have like a solo segment. So for instance, in my first LEC show, I had like a minute of, hey, hi, these are the new people on the show. Wow, that's a guy called Nymaera. Nymaera, go do a solo segment on Zeri. And I'm like, there's like 100,000 people watching this. I gotta go do a solo segment for the first time, like in the LEC studio for a couple of minutes, talk about Zeri. And that scared the absolute shit out of me. I have to say, in terms of the on-screen anxiety, that's the one moment I'm like, oh, bloody hell, what am I doing here? I think that first pre-show blew out the rest of my nerves for like the entirety of the split, though. After that point, I got a lot more comfortable. But in terms of being on analyst desk, having those solo segments, and particularly as for myself, it wasn't as something which I had been as experienced with. When you're remote broadcasting, you wing it a lot more on analyst desk. So the analyst desk stuff, I think, for me, has been a bit more stress casting. You have a later call time. You've got less stuff to prep. A lot of it is based on the skills that you already have in terms of, like, you don't need to plan as much for casting. Not that you don't need to, in terms of, like, the segments, right? Your prep will be done in your own time or whatever. But, for me, I definitely prefer the casting on that side of things. But either way, it's kind of exciting to explore the opportunities in the analyst desk stuff, too, and explore kind of that skill set. But for me, there has been a lot more stress because I'm trying to catch up to speed on that area of my game.
Fair. And obviously, so I guess I'm going to start wrapping up within the last few questions. So, do you guys find it less stressful when you know you're on cast together?
Yeah, to an extent. I think, like, or rather, at least it's what I will say is it is certainly, I don't know whether less stress is the right word, but rather we have I am very comfortable with Alex, if that makes sense. And that definitely helps in terms of being able to prep, being able to do certain stuff in terms of like like how we've got a workflow, how we want to get things done, what do we want to set up for a game. And that element of it certainly makes things less stressful. But actually things like the game, how much time we have to prep, what's the stakes involved, all the rest of it still very much applies. But certainly, actually, it's at least on the desk, it's a lot easier to cast with someone you've got rapport with, and I've got
Yeah, for
quite a
sure.
lot of
I'll agree
rapport
with
with
that.
Alex
Yeah.
for obvious reasons.
Yeah, and I think because as with all of these answers, right, it's always going to be a bit multi-part. I think that in terms of being actually in game, in terms of the back and forth we have between us, it's very comfortable. It's something that we've practiced for a very long time. And of course, we've been brothers for near on 26 years. It's got a hell of a lot of rapport. And we're very unique in the ability to bring that, at least in the space that we're currently in. I will say one of the other things which kind of like adds on to this though is that obviously we've been jumped up in terms of the tier that we're casting at quite rapidly this split, and every time you jump up a split, there's more stuff you need to evaluate, there's more feedback you have access to, there's more people watching you, which means you get more feedback from fans, from people that you know, from people that you're working with, whatever, right? And the higher you go with that, the more you have to examine the work you've already done and think, actually, what can we do with this in terms of what we've got. So, Sam and I have done things in certain ways for the entirety of our casting career at this point, and some of them are obviously very unique, they're very cool, but actually there's kind of like a unique kind of like, oh hell, what do we do with this if this is kind of like a bad habit that we've ingrained, and that's something which I've personally been thinking about a little bit, because I come in, I cast with Ashin, I cast with Quickshot, and because we both come in at that point as high level casters who are then trying to figure out stuff at that point, rather than Sam and I, who started as complete zero experience and then build things up very organically that way. Sometimes things don't grow in exactly the right way you need to at these higher levels of competition, and having to like break that down can be unique stress in its own right. But I'm sure that's something that we'll continually have to do over an amount of time. So yes, it's very comfortable in one way. Actually progressing it past a certain point can have its own unique challenges, though.
Cool. Well, yeah, for sure. I can imagine that you've got a very thin line to tread.
Yeah.
So it makes me wonder: is there anything that you wish you would have known before you started casting?
Always ask for stuff in writing.
Yeah.
If you're making a deal with someone, ask for it in a written email. That's one thing. What else? That's a big one. I think I think a lot of the rest of it I kind of knew, right? I think one thing is like never be afraid to review your own work. You just have to do it. Always review your own work.
Talk with other
There's some
people to review with them as well. You'll always pick up. People will pick up more than you expect, and a lot of people at a lot of levels are really willing and down to do that kind of thing. And especially if you're trying to get started as well, that's a really good thing to do. On top of that, what I say, learn microphone technique. Just do it. Be a good friend to your producers. And
well, there's stuff the things that like there's stuff which I knew, and there's stuff which I'm like I knew that, but it's still important. And there's stuff which like, damn, I wish I'd known that at the start. So like, there's some stuff like we knew, we kind of did, and it's like, yeah, just don't be an asshole to people. That's a really big thing in these industries. Just try and be nice to people, folks. In terms of stuff which I wish I knew though, it's a lot of it is in terms of like being industry savvy, in terms of understanding your own worth, asking for stuff in a written email, so it's more than just a verbal agreement. Asking for feedback is kind of a thing that we did already. Though honestly, I feel like there's a lot of stuff which I'm not thinking of right now, because I now know it. Trying to think of what I didn't know at the start. That's a lot of stuff. So it's kind of hard to put that down to a concise answer.
I suppose it is quite a little bit of a big question. I guess this last question that I have is probably going to be a little bit of a big one as well. And I'm sorry about that. This is gonna make you guys think. But what can the industry and its fans do to make it so much easier on mental health for
Remember
people
that
in
we're
these
human.
positions. Well, yeah.
Remember that we're the humans. So actually, there was a quote actually. Now, if you look at the so I do a thing which is not always good, I suppose. I've kind of gotten away with it because people have been very nice to me, I suppose. But I check a lot of comments. After my casts, and in some ways this is advised because actually, checking out what people think of you is really important, right? Because they are your, people who just watch the product are the people that you are doing your product for. So their opinions matter a lot. They don't always know how to convey their points. So sometimes they're like, oh, this guy is so shit. Or like, oh, wow, this guy is just X version of Y person. I'm like, okay, I can kind of understand. Like, you have to decode it, but like sometimes it still hurts to see that, right? So if you look at the YouTube comment section for the Euphoria episode that I was on, someone's like, "Oh man,
gosh.
this guy just looks like a cheaper version of the other casters they've got in." And like, I'm like, okay. So I replied to him and I said, "Well, I'm new. I've taken a lot of inspiration from these guys. There's always going to be some." And like, I very much came in with a very down to earth answer because at the end of the day, I can kind of understand where that comes from, but I want to kind of level with people. And I kind of put out this comment. This guy replied like a couple of hours later saying, "Oh man, it's actually really hard to remember sometimes that you're just like a regular person on the other side of the screen." And sometimes I'll see that in Reddit threads or Twitter threads and stuff like that. It can be very hard to engage with people like that, and always being social media plugged in can be very difficult. But for me, I feel like I've gained a lot from people treating me like I'm human, but it takes a bit of effort to achieve that sometimes because you have to be kind of like present and interacting with people. So I think, again, just kind of like reassessing what you're saying in the big social media spheres. It can be really important to a lot of on-air talent. Those comments often can sting, even though if in like your heart of hearts you know that it's just someone being a bit aggy on social media or whatever. So yeah, I think that's the big thing for me. Just remember that we're human. We're trying to make things work. We're professionals. We'll take feedback as feedback in any case, but just maybe be kind. Sometimes some people really suffer from this, and some people who do get loads of hate, you don't need to add on to that pile.
Cool. What about you, Sam?
Do me a favor, just rephrase the question for me again, just so I'm kind of got the context right, please.
What can the industry and obviously us as fans do to improve the the mental health within the space? How can we help when it's really difficult on those really difficult days and stuff like that? I mean, obviously there is the whole be kind, but is that what it boils down to when it comes to the changing of the mental health? Is it lowering our expectations? Is it...
Man, that is, yes. Thank you for rephrasing that, Ellie. That's helpful. So I think I'll give a pretty good answer there. I will never ask people not to give feedback. That's actually quite unhelpful. But how you give feedback is a challenge even for people who do it all the time. Like, I'm constantly reevaluating, and it also depends on the person you're giving feedback to. And feedback is good. Please give us feedback. Like by all means, it has how we get better. But if your feedback is effectively, yeah, that was shit. These guys are fucking awful, which has happened and will continue to happen, and happens to some people more than others because of the color of their skin, their gender, how they present themselves, any other number of reasons that makes them more applicable to online and in person. Unfortunately, vitriol from the general populace, or not the general populace, small parts of the populace who are very much not general.
So it's not quite everyone, but
yeah, no, let me rephrase that. That's a little unfair. But how you phrase feedback is pretty important, and actually, it's also tends to be quite important to actually say what things people did well. Like, it's very easy to say, yeah, that wasn't so good, or yeah, that was really mediocre, or yeah. Actually, sometimes it's really nice to say, oh, that was really good. Like, you did this well, because that's actually also really valid. That's also really valuable feedback to know what went well and why people liked things. And that is often a really good thing for on-air talent to know that actually their work is being appreciated. And especially when they have done something well, it's nice to hear, that people liked it, right? And it isn't just you, and that kind of when you and when people are having a tough time, having the respect to understand those decisions and boundaries, because obviously when people got quite like when people like Captain Flowers or Cadril or Sharks or even someone like Upset, right, have or make decisions that change the viewing experience or change the competitive experience in some cases for obviously players, for example. There is a level of respect, and you don't have to know everything, I think is a way to put it. Actually, sometimes because we are such social public figures, people often expect to know everything about what you do or did or the decisions you make and everything to be transparent. And sometimes you just don't have the ability to talk about those things, be that for private reasons, be that for legal reasons, be that for any number of reasons. And sometimes people just have to be okay with, actually, I support you, and or or I understand the decision. I'm sad about that you're not attending for whatever reason, but to respect the decisions that have been made, if you know what I mean. Assuming, of course, discussion about decisions is understandable, right? Because people are curious, but sometimes you have to be okay with not knowing, and that is a very hard thing to do, and probably honestly impossible, I think, because there will always be people who wildly speculate about why things happen the way they happen, but obviously that can be quite harmful to people who are deliberately trying to step away from stuff for often quite difficult reasons. And support through that is obviously very valuable, but actually sometimes there's an element of public doesn't always have a right to, or shouldn't necessarily expect, shouldn't necessarily expect to know everything about why decisions have been made, and that's a difficult line to draw when you are a public figure, which people know quite a lot about or think they know quite a lot about.
Yeah.
One last thing on that though, like in terms of like, I know Sam was saying like, try and reach out with positive stuff too. I've actually had a lot of people reach out through messages, through Twitter comments, and hell, you're one of them, Ellie, actually. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
like,
Ellie's
I've
great.
had a lot of positive feedback this split, and that has really, really helped. So in terms of, it is actually perfectly okay. It's not weird to reach out and say, "Hey, I liked what you did on broadcast," even if you don't share DMs with someone. Like, it's genuinely, sometimes that'll be different from person
really
to person, but
appreciated.
like, it's actually really appreciated to kind of appreciate your on-air talent. So yeah, we'll just hammer down on that again. When I've had some worse moments this split, looking back on those comments has really helped me. So yeah,
exactly.
I agree with that.
And again, to reiterate, valid feedback and criticism is perfectly fine by all means, but it's how you go about it, right? Like, spend a little bit
Anyway,
of
that
time
was just a small side. That was a small wrap up. That was a small wrap up.
But yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's a difficult line to draw, but and there is an art to it, and not everyone gets it right all the time. But yes.
No, I really, really respect those answers, and I think we've covered some really, really difficult topics today, and I'm really grateful that you guys could come and have a chat and just kind of, hopefully, we make a little bit of a difference in showing people that casting isn't the fun and games 100% of the time that everyone thinks it is.
It can be pretty awesome too.
Yeah.
In fact, it is awesome, really. Honestly, the work day is awesome. So there's a lot of stuff which happens outside that can be a little bit stressful.
But we've also learned that to respect our casters, respect our on-air talent. And
it's great.
I really hope as well that this kind of... if this was to change at least one person's outlook, I think I'd be happy, to be quite honest. But no, that's it for us today.
Thanks for having us.
Make sure to follow the guys on social media, because they are both working incredibly hard. They are both great at what they do, and as always, we will have helplines and websites available for people who are in need of help or somebody to talk to at this present time. I've been Ellibear, that's been Nymaera, that's also been Initia1ise, and thank you very much.
Bye.